My name's Joe Rukin, and I'm here to tell you about plans to potentially develop even more of the green belt around Kenilworth and what you can do about it. Because there are currently 36 sites being consulted on right now for strategic growth locations and new settlements as part of the South Warwickshire Local Plan. And additional places are submitted in the latest call for sites are also in that consultation. Now, if you are like me and you think that Kenilworth has seen quite enough construction over the last couple of years, with already more in the pipeline, then you need to say enough. And you need to say enough by a minute to midnight on the 7th of March. Now, the great thing is that while the consultation is set on government targets, that they've set the number of houses that have to be built, more sites have been identified than are actually needed. So there is a choice, and maybe there's even a way of getting that number down as well. So I'm going to explain what's going on with this scary looking map the best that I can, but I'm just going to concentrate on a couple of things because this is complicated. And there are links to other sources of information in the text below this video, but I'm going to try and keep this as simple as possible because while you absolutely can do something about this, just saying no isn't good enough. Staff members at the council have made it very clear, at the councils, I should say, have made it very clear that they will not be looking at the number of responses, but they will be looking at the quality of the arguments in those responses. So really, you've got to be hitting both of those two metrics. All responses to the South Warwickshire Local Plan need to be in at a minute to midnight on March the 7th, whether that's by email, the official forms, or sending in a letter. Now, I didn't want this to be all party political, but for transparency on that score, I need to be upfront and say I will be standing in the county elections in May. So here's a disclaimer, but I hope you will accept that very much like the fire surface video I did this time last year when there wasn't an election, I've made this video now because now's when the consultation is. And for anyone who thinks it's not worth responding to consultations and it's already all decided, as I said, this time last year, there was a consultation and plans to close Kenilworth and other fire stations across Warwickshire. And the number of responses there were to that consultation fundamentally changed those plans. So it is absolutely worth responding. Sadly, there is another bit of party political stuff I need to get out of the way at the start because some of you may have seen an advert on social media from the Conservatives which tells you to click here to have your say on Keir Starmer's plans for 2,188 houses per year across South Warwickshire. But that link doesn't actually take you to the consultation. It's a Conservative Party data collection exercise. So if you did click there, you haven't had your say. You will still need to respond to the consultation, and you'll likely get some emails from the Tories in the run-up to the county council elections in May. Some of you may have also got a letter from the Tories saying that Green-led council plan to build on the green belt. Now, not only is that skipping over the fact that in 2024 we saw 6 sites around Kenilworth being built on that the Tories took out of the green belt, but this is not how local plans work. First, as I said, it's the government who set the numbers. So, but as for the sites that are up for consultation, that's actually mostly down to the landowners. 736 of the sites being assessed in the local plan came from the call for sites where landowners put their sites forward. So that's 87% of all the sites in this plan were actually put forward by the landowners, their agents, and land promoters. And that's actually possibly the most important reason why you need to respond to this consultation, because all of those promoters, all of those land agents, all of those professional construction industry lobbyists, they're all going to be responding to this consultation. And I'll just give you one example: Catesby Estates. because first example I looked at, but after looking at Catesby Estates, I don't need another example. Because looking at their website, they proudly say that they successfully lobbied for Woodside on Glasshouse Lane and the adjoining Crewe Lane site to be removed from the Greenbelt. And if you look at their brochure, they actually have an endorsement from Chris Elliott, the Chief Executive of Warwick District Council. So the Chief Executive of the Council, someone who you think might have, something of a say when it comes to assessing the new local plan, is actually quoted in a land promoter's brochure saying, "We look forward to continuing our working relationship with them." And of course, Catesby are in the new local plan. They are lobbying for Oaks Farm, part of SG4, to be taken out of the Green Belt, because according to them, it's a sustainable location for potential housing development around Kenilworth. Well, that's what their website says. If you look at the actual call for sites document for 2023, the promoter for that plot was Pegasus Group. So it seems that there are actually two sets of lobbyists being employed for that one plot of land, to promote that one plot of land, a site registered to former Conservative County Councillor Alan Coburn. Anyway, before moving on, the idea that SG4 or any of the sites are sustainable is an argument that developers make. Basically, what they're trying to say is that because you are building another 1,271 homes on the edge of an existing town, or to put that into context, over 3 more Leek Wootons between Kenilworth and Leek Wooton, the current infrastructure, you can cope. And while you might walk to the top shops on Caesar Road or to Clinton School or St John's School in 10 minutes from the edge of that site on Farm Road, you probably ain't walking there from Broad Lane caravans. That is not sustainable, especially not in terms of traffic. Anyway, in terms of the numbers, Warwick District Council are working together with Stratford District Council. And the number of homes that the target for 2050 set by the previous Conservative government was 41,975, or 1,679 homes to be built every year. But then, on the 12th of December last year, the very day the joint cabinet of the two councils met to sign off that new plan, the new Labour government upped that number to 54,700, or 2,188 per year. But despite what that Tory advert says, it's not actually 2,188 per year, because you can take off the houses already in the pipeline, which haven't been built yet, like those on Kings Hill and the former school sites, and that pretty much halves the to be found number to 28,257, or 1,130 per year. Now, I went to that joint cabinet meeting and I genuinely could not believe it, because literally the morning of that meeting, the to be found target was 15,532, or 621 per year. It almost doubled that very day, but most of the councillors and all of the officers didn't seem to think this mattered in the slightest. Now, the Green councillors came up with an alternative and said, what we should do is just cut the length of the plan and run it for the minimum allowed period of 15 years to from 2027 to 2042. Because if it's a shorter plan, you have to sign off fewer sites. And given that the government targets had changed that very day, there's a good chance they might change again before 2042. Not only by 2042 will you almost certainly have a different government or two by then, but far more certain at the moment is that the two councils drawing up these plans will have been abolished by then. So why on earth do they think they have the right to plan to 2050 if they're probably not even going to exist in 4 or 5 years' time? Anyway, so while this video primarily concerns Kenilworth, if you are concerned about the scale of the South Warwickshire Local Plan, the most important thing I would say put in that consultation response is that the plan should only run for 15 years. That would take over 10,000 homes out of the to be found target. And you not only need to be putting that into your consultation response, but you probably need to be telling that to your district councillor as well, because at the joint cabinet meeting, the Greens were the only ones who thought it was a good idea. You need to be telling your district councillor, no matter what party they are in, that you expect them to consider having a plan that only runs for the minimum of 2042, because the target's going to change before 2042. So why pick this bigger target? Because the thing is, having a longer target is what the developers want. Developers want to keep building green belt estates on the edges of towns because they are the most profitable developments for them, as they get to build more executive houses and they have to put in less in terms of infrastructure. So the more sites that are in the plan, the more power is with the developers to cherry pick the sites that best suit their balance sheet. So, as I said, in Kenilworth in 2024, there were 6 new housing estates being built. But in terms of infrastructure, what do we get? We got some speed humps. That's literally what we got in terms of infrastructure. You might think that pavements would be a bare minimum, but no, not even pavements outside these estates. That's just unbelievable. You cannot keep building more homes and expect the existing infrastructure to cope, especially when it's not already good enough. Bus routes, which were used in the justification for building some of these new housing estates, had already been cut before anyone moved into those houses. And council officers themselves have admitted that if you have this dispersed approach to development, you don't get the infrastructure. Now, before I go any further, it's important to explain what the Green Belt actually is, because you might be tempted to think, well, fields around towns and cities, that's the Green Belt. No, they may be green fields, but the Green Belt is a special legal designation which protects land from urban sprawl and prevents towns, cities and villages from growing up. This is the legally defined Green Belt around Kenilworth. And as you can see, everything around Kenilworth has Green Belt protection, besides, of course, the land which was taken out of Green Belt a couple of years ago, like Kings Hill. Now, there are specific rules for developing on the Green Belt, that it should only be done for exceptional circumstances. And if you look at the National Planning Policy Framework, the exceptional circumstance quoted is a local authority cannot meet housing targets without declassifying Green Belt. But when you look at the strategic growth and new settlement locations in the local plan, over 54,000 homes, so almost double the to be found target by 2050, almost double that 2050 target can be found without touching the Green Belt at all. But the way that the council officers want this to work is to do it completely the other way around. Look at all the Green Belt locations now, pretend they don't have legal protection, decide which are sustainable, and if they are sustainable, that then counts as exceptional circumstances. So in your responses to this consultation, you absolutely need to be saying that these Green Belt locations are not sustainable. Because when you look at the number of homes you're looking at for SG1 and SG4, they obviously aren't. But this subjective point of sustainability, which these land promoters have been selling these plots on, when you've got sustainability, that apparently then counts as exceptional circumstances for declassifying the green belt land. So you basically fiddle the assessment of whether it's sustainable or not. Because when you look at the sustainability appraisal accompanying the local plan, all of the sustainability scores are terrible. So what they've done is they just ranked them in order. So because east of Lillington, or SG5, somehow gets a yellow box for pollution, it is the most sustainable site. With Kenilworth, SG4 has got 7 pink boxes where others have a few more reds there. So it's in the top 5 of most sustainable. But these aren't the most sustainable, they are the least unsustainable. This is how they are building up to justify exceptional circumstances for taking sites out of Greenbelt. And a bigger problem is that many of these ratings, they've just been made up. And I don't mean that, as I say, there's a subjective assessment that you might not agree with. I mean, they've just been made up. Because in terms of the landscape scores in the sustainability assessment, they've referenced a 12-year-old landscape sensitivity, ecological and geomorphological study. Didn't look at Kenilworth. It just looked at a handful of villages around Warwick District. And that's why when you look at the sustainability assessment, SG1 has a red rating in this assessment for landscape, because they did do the assessment all those years ago in 2013 for Burton Green. The problem is that assessment was done both before HS2 and the new housing on Westwood Heath Road. So even the one that's been done is wrong. For everywhere else listed in the Warwick District area, those areas were not covered in that report in 2013. There is no data whatsoever behind the landscape scores for Warwick District. In Stratford District, their council has designated some places as special landscape areas, which means more of their sites score red in that category, and it just completely skews the results because they've done the work and we ain't. It's also worth mentioning that 2013 study did assess Leek Wootton almost completely as red, but that assessment stopped on the brook at the bottom of Warwick Road where Broad Lane Caravans is, and SG4 starts on the other side of that brook. In terms of cultural heritage, SG4 has been rated pink. Now, over half the other sites in the whole local plan for the strategic growth areas have a greater cultural heritage score than SG4. The thing is, this year we celebrate the 450th anniversary of the last visit of Elizabeth I to Kenilworth Castle. Now, this is the room above her bedroom where it is thought she watched Coventry actors perform a hot tide play, and that is Oaks Farm. You can see SG4 from Elizabeth I's window. Now, I would say that counts as a site which could significantly impact the setting of a Grade 1 listed building. I mean, I'm not sure there is anything on any other site that could possibly outrank. You can see it from Elizabeth I's window. You can also see Oaks Farm from the Great Hall, which is where Edward II became the first King of England to abdicate in 1327. And again, you would think this counts as impacting on the setting of a Grade 1 listed building. And it's not just that, but in terms of cultural heritage in Kenilworth, you would think that can you see it from the castle is the very first question to be asking. There is literally no excuse for missing this. Also, The methodology for the Housing and Land Availability Assessment, or HELA, seems to have deliberately undervalued both greenbelt and productive agricultural land. Greenbelt has been given a weighting of 6% in the assessment. Even less importance has been given to the productivity of agricultural land. And out of the red, amber and green ratings in the assessment, not one piece of greenbelt land is rated as red. Not one. But greenbelt, it's what land developers want. It gives them the most profit for the least outlay, destroying agricultural land, which we need for food production, biodiversity, climate action, public well-being. And this is land that is supposedly protected in all but exceptional circumstances. But maybe the thing that stands out the most in the whole part of this plan is that it pretends that HS2 isn't there. In both the Coventry and Warwickshire Green Belt study and the topic paper on the Green Belt accompanying the consultation, HS2 is not mentioned at all. In the final report on the Green Belt for the local plan, Arup, the construction giant who came up with all the original designs for HS2, they do mention it, but they mention it only to point out that they've just ignored it altogether, because HS2 has apparently not changed the character of the Green Belt whatsoever. And that's despite the fact that the justification that they've used completely contradicts the guidance in the NPPF. So not only are they ignoring the fact that HS2 makes the remaining green belt on all sides of Kenilworth even more important, but they're ignoring all the habitat mitigation sites which are already in the pipeline from HS2. And of course, that building next to HS2 might mess up all of the biodiversity metrics and render any promises from HS2 Limited to, that they've made about mitigation and wildlife corridors makes them totally meaningless. What unquestionably is the biggest factor currently and permanently impacting the South Warwickshire Green Belt has been completely ignored in all of the reports about the South Warwickshire Green Belt. HS2 fundamentally changes the Green Belt. A strategical decision needs to be made one way or the other, whether you build up to it from one side or the other or not at all. And nothing can make this plan more fundamentally flawed than ignoring the impact of HS2, especially when it comes to Kenilworth. And of course, the other reason you can't ignore HS2 is because there is land submitted in this consultation which has been sold off because of HS2. Now, this isn't the only one, but this part of Crackley Farm was only sold in November, and it's one of the bits of land that is actually hidden, sort of, in the consultation. Now, this is something that I know councillors have not been happy with the officers doing. But when you go onto the map, the interactive map accompanying the consultation, it only shows you the new settlements and the strategic growth area proposals. To actually see all of the proposed sites that are part in this consultation, you have to select the HELA Part B, not Part A, Part B, Site Selection tab, and all this other stuff appears. And it also unlocks other information about the strategic growth blobs as well. The one bit of good news is that when you look around the map of Kenilworth, it's not quite as scary as you might think, because a massive chunk of SG1, for example, is the University of Warwick. It's them wanting to build more on the land where their buildings already are. Though SG1 does come with 4,600 homes as well. A big chunk of SG2 is not so scary because it's employment land on the showground, and there used to be a lot of more permanent employment buildings on that site. meaning that probably is almost certainly going to fulfill the new classification of grey belt. SG4, on the other hand, is 100% green belt development, which would basically join up more or less Kenilworth and Lee Wood. So there we are. I think that's enough to be going on with. To summate, these are sort of points you need to be making in your consultation response. Firstly, most importantly, and I don't know if they're going to completely ignore this, but I think this is the point that everyone should be making because it is a valid point, but that is that the plan should only run for the minimum length of 15 years. It lowers the target for housing sites, and even without that, the sustainability assessment states the target can be fulfilled without touching the green belt at all. But given that both the councils drawing up this plan will have been abolished well before 2050 or indeed 2042, they shouldn't be making plans to 2050. They should be doing the minimum term. The proposals around Kenilworth represent unsustainable locations which would promote car use. The green belt around Kenilworth fulfills all of the statutory purposes of green belt land, yet the importance of this status has been deliberately minimised to almost insignificance, despite the fact the area has been classified as part of a large built-up area, legally specifying that that green belt should be protected. There's nothing strategic about a plan or any proposal which pretends that HS2 has no lasting impacts, and the lack of any attention of the impact on HS2 on the green belt just proves that this assessment is fundamentally flawed, especially, as I say, when it comes to Kenilworth. Kenilworth is also designated a historic town, the character of which should be preserved, and somehow the cultural assessment doesn't seem to think that you can see it from the castle counts as a negative cultural heritage impact. Say the landscape assessments in the sustainability assessment are fundamentally flawed. There's literally no data behind them when it comes to all the Warwick district sites apart from that one in SG1, which again ignores the developments that's happened since that assessment was made. And quite importantly, in assessing responses to the consultation, the staff at the two councils, they need to be paying less attention to what the corporate lobbyists representing the construction industry think and more attention to the people who live in the area. Maybe we want better, not just we don't want greenbelt housing, but we want better quality housing, more sustainable, genuinely sustainable housing built to a higher standard, which of course cuts their profits. Oh, and yeah, in Kenilworth, we've had all this construction, so all these new houses, and no infrastructure. Yeah, that's enough for now. Now, you can respond to the consultation by filling in the form on the consultation portal. Landing page is the first link below this video. It's not as hard as it might look in the first instance. But to use the form, you have to register in advance. And please don't be reading this at like 11 o'clock on the 7th of March. We need to be getting this done a little bit in advance. And you can answer as many or as fewer questions as you like. If you just want to comment on specific sites, that's Chapter 4, Meeting South Warwickshire's Sustainable Development Requirements. Or you can also just email swlp@warwickdc.gov.uk, or you can respond to the address that should be coming up on screen now. But you cannot just say no. You have to give reasons. Now, I hope I've given you enough reasons to be getting on with. There are other things you might want to think about. There's a link to the Warwick District Green Party that's got a few other things that you might want to chug in. But it is important to use your own words. And whatever you choose to do, you need to do it by a minute to midnight on March the 7th. Good luck.